So before watching today's video, there is a chance you guys may be thinking Toronto, the fourth largest city in North America, has a wide range of people from all races to all social backgrounds. It must be a crazy place. It must be a place filled with a lot of horror stories. But as someone who has lived in Toronto for my entire life, I can say, though through its up and downs, I've lived here for 20 odd years, Toronto is a place where I consider home, and in my heart, in my mind, there's more happy things and happy stories than there are horror stories in Toronto. But without further ado, grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and let's discover the horror stories of this place I called home, Toronto. Witnessed a guy try to abduct a little girl. First time posting. When I was 18 years old, I worked as a lifeguard in Toronto, Canada. I've been doing this job for 2 years and worked a lot of different pools. I had picked up this shift that was every Friday night, 6:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. during the winter season, also known as the loser shift for people who don't have anything fun to do on Friday nights. In early December, I was the only one left in the pool building on my Friday shift at about 10:30 p.m. The pool building is attached to a main community center that has an ice rink and gym in it, but the pool building has a completely different entrance and parking lot than the community center. Anyways, I was about to lock up and drop the key off at the main building when I saw a girl waiting outside in the parking lot. She was about 10 years old, and I recognized her as one of the people who came for free swim during my shift. I was just about to ask her if she wanted to come wait inside because it was freezing outside when the phone rang. So I went back into the staff office to answer the call, and after I was done, the girl was gone. I assumed her parents had come to pick her up or something logical like that. I then grabbed my stuff, turned the lights off, and locked the door to drop the key off and then walk home. I was walking across the parking lot for about 15 meters when I heard a faint, muffled scream. I turned around quickly and saw a truck idling at the far end of the parking lot. It was kind of far away, and I had to squint my eyes to see what was going on. To my horror, I realized a man was bent over and struggling to get something into his trunk. I moved a little closer towards the truck and saw that the man was wearing all black and had a scarf covering half of his face. Then I saw a girl's arm trying to hold the trunk open while the man was trying to shut it. She had her legs sticking out of the trunk too, kicking and also holding the trunk door open. I recognized her as the girl that was waiting outside before. I noticed her bright pink winter jacket. 2 seconds after I realized what was going on, I started panicking and looking for my phone in my bag. The parking lot was completely empty, other than that one truck. It was dimly lit and the ground was very icy. I looked up once I found my phone at the bottom of my bag. The man stopped struggling to get the girl into the trunk and turned to face me. As quickly as possible, I turned around and started running back towards the pool door. I looked over my shoulder while I was cautiously running, trying not to slip on the ice. He was charging towards me. I was about 10 meters away from the door, and he had gotten significantly closer to me. I started screaming, but it was hard to scream while running. I got to the door and struggled to get the keys out of my coat pocket. He was about 5 meters away from me when I unlocked the door and shut it behind me, then locked it. I called the cops on my phone and told the operator what was happening, and she said the police were on their way. It was terrifying to watch the man come up right up at the door and try to open it, looking at me through the glass window at the top of the door. He banged on it and was yelling at me. I couldn't really hear what he was saying though. I then gave him the finger, and then I think he realized that I was on the phone, and then he took off. It was horrifying to be behind the building door and not be able to see what was going on with the truck and the little girl. I heard sirens pull into the parking lot about 5 long minutes after he left. I then felt that it was safe to open the door and walk outside. When I got outside, the girl was running towards the police cars, and the truck was nowhere in sight. Turns out that he lured her into his truck, not really sure how, and then tried to abduct her. Once he stopped banging on the pool door, he ran back to his car, threw the girl out of the trunk, and then sped out of the parking lot to never be seen again. I gave the police my statement, and as far as I know, he was never caught. Heads up, Toronto gals, not the cash cab. This happened to a friend of mine a few days ago, and I thought it was important to share so that others in the area can be aware. My friend, a 28-year-old female, was walking on Bay Street at night when she heard men's voices coming from a cab passing her on the street. She said she heard something about cash cab before she lost sight of them behind a bus stop as they slowed, then stopped for a red light. As she passed the bus stop, she saw them asking another young woman a question. The woman shrugged and walked away. My friend then walked a bit further, which brought her directly in the field of view of two 30-something men in its back seats. Then, they called out to her, "Hey, what's the deepest ocean trench?" She didn't see any camera crew or the host of Cash Cab, so she was confused. Still, she knew the answer, so she replied, "The Marianas?" One guy said, "See? We would have gotten it right there. Hey, you're really smart. Come be on the Cash Cab with us." They then opened the door, the second guy shoved over, and the first moved to the middle seat, gesturing for her to get in. Again, not having seen any indication that this was truly the Cash Cab, she said she was totally and utterly weirded out at this point, so she declined. As she described it, she shook her head awkwardly and walked away. It was until later that she realized just how truly creepy this was because, although she couldn't put her finger on it at first, the two men seemed completely sober. She wonders if this wasn't a setup for a kidnapping rape, and so reported it to the police. She regrets she didn't get the plate number and isn't even certain if the car was a real cab at all, although it did look like one. Hopefully, no one will fall for this trick, but thought it would be a good idea to share the story anyways, just in case. Please share this with any friends and family, especially women you know in Toronto. Thanks. Only in Canada. This story comes from my father, born near Toronto, who grew up on a farm with a younger brother and an older sister. So, this happened in 1969, while my dad was 8 or 9 years old. One night, both parents were out of the house, along with his brother. This left him and his sister at home alone. Eventually, the phone rings, and my father picks up with standard Canadian politeness. "Hello, this is Bob." The person calling said they were coming to kill both my father and his sister, and told them to leave the house. My father, slightly spooked, used the intercom system to page his sister, telling her what happened. At that time, both children could drive, as they had been doing so on the farm, so leaving the house wasn't too much of a problem. While packing some things to leave, the phone rings again, and my father answers it. "Hello, this is Bob." The voice says, "Why haven't you left yet? I'm coming to kill you." Which my father replies in a stereotypical Canadian accent, "Well, I'm trying to leave, but you keep on fucking calling. I can't leave when I have to keep answering the phone now, can I?" The phone hangs up, and my father and his sister drive to where their parents were having dinner. Nothing else happened with the voice. It was probably just a prank of some sorts. And it didn't really faze my dad, but I thought you guys would enjoy the tale from Canada. Night school. So, today, I would like to share one of the strangest and creepiest stories of my life, for your entertainment. It was 2008. I was attending night school at CALC, Broadview in Danforth in Toronto, Canada. and one day I was about 40 minutes early for class, so I decided to go smoke a little joint I had on me. I walked down behind CALC and over the little walking bridge that goes over the DVP highway throughout the city on ramp, and found a little area off of the main trail that goes out to Riverdale Park, the big park on Broadview all you rappers shoot your skyline shots at for your videos anyways. I lit my little joint and took some tokes when an older Asian man in his late 50s, early 60s walked up to where I was chilling. I figured he was just out for a walk. He had a little grocery bag in his hand, wrapped around something, and he smiled and nodded at me. And I used to be super friendly, so I smiled back. I decided to walk out of there and find somewhere else to smoke before class. As I walked down the trails, he began to follow me. I even started taking trails that made no sense at all, and I even went in a circle, but he still followed me. Now he was filling a lot with a bag in his hand. I walked back out of the main trail where there were people. It was only about 6 p.m. in June, and still very light outside. And he still followed me all the way down the trail out to the park. He seemed to lose interest in me and start looking at some flowers and stuff, so I walked out a bit further and finished my doobie. At this point, I thought he might be a cop or something like that, because at the time, I'm an in-shape 18-year-old male, full punk gear, tattoos. I mean, people thought I was friggin' scary, and there are women walking alone on the same trails with headphones on, so why would he want to attack me? Either way, I was feeling uneasy. Once I was done smoking, I began to walk back up the trail towards the school. He started following me again. As I sped up, he sped up. As I slowed down, he slowed down. I stopped to tie my combat boot tighter in case he was going to attack me, and he even stopped. By now, I'm back at a little walking bridge and see two random joggers stopping to take a break. I walk up to them pretending I know them, but low-key explain what's happening. They played along for me, and the guy went off in the wooded area. I decided to walk back over the bridge to class. The man never stopped staring at me from the forest as I walked over the bridge. I kept looking back as I walked on the cement path that goes along the field behind the school. I was at least a solid 75 to 100 meters away from the walking bridge, and he still wasn't in sight or following me. I figured he had finally fucked off, and I was good. So I took one last look back, very far from the bridge now, and didn't see him. I put in my earbuds and started listening to music to calm me down. Within 30 seconds of listening to my music, it cut out due to a phone call from my girlfriend. When this happened, I suddenly heard footsteps close behind me and spun around, only to see the same man who I thought was gone now just 5 feet behind me. I run up the stairs and see my classmates at the time, Warren. I throw off my bag and studded jacket, and we get to fight if needed. He walks past us, up the path of Danforth, always looking at us. He walks then back down the path towards us, stops, and looks at me and smiles in such a way I felt sick to my stomach. It was as if he was smiling to let me know I was lucky I got away from him. He had his hand in his grocery bag, filling with something inside. He took off behind the school and was gone. I reported it to the school in case he went after any of the other students, and my mom thought it would calm me down to remind me that Jeffrey Dahmer liked to go after in-shape 18-year-old men. I didn't see him when I left school that night, but 2 weeks later, he was in the paper arrested for masturbating on the subway while holding a woman at knife point. He was wearing the same shirt in his mugshot that he was when he was following me. I hope that entertains you for the day. Happy Monday, friends. Stay safe. Terrifying tale of Toronto Transit. If anyone on the sub lives in Toronto, you most likely know that our subway is a hotspot for every Colorful character. I was never an avid commuter until I got into college, but it didn't take long for me to realize that loonies love to ride the train. It was about 11 p.m., and I was heading back from hanging out with some of my college friends. Now, I don't live in Toronto, my school is just there. I live in Mississauga. For those who don't know, and most of you probably don't, it takes about, give or take, half an hour for me to get to the bus terminal that has a bus going to my area. So, I spent quite a lot of time sitting on the train. It was a weekday, so there weren't that many people still around, which was good because I preferred it not being packed. But, unfortunately, this was the prime time for the colorful characters I mentioned earlier. When the train came, I found myself a comfortable spot. There was only about 5 other people in the cabin or whatever one segment of a train is called. Everyone seemed perfectly fine. Well, mostly everyone, except for this tall, white, lanky dude who was standing right up against the doors muttering something to himself, only to himself. Let me describe how he looked like. He had messy brown hair, his teeth were disgusting, and his eyes were bloodshot. So, it doesn't take a genius to figure out he was probably a bit less sane than the other people around there. You know, I didn't really care. At first, I just decided to mind my own business, right? Grabbing out my headphones and plugging in both my earbuds and trying to avert my gaze, but then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed that he was staring at me. Needless to say, at that very moment, I got a bit nervous. But still, I continued to ignore him, hoping he'd leave soon or look at someone else. So I decided to look around the cabin some more, only to notice that everyone else had already got off, and it was just me and him inside the cabin. I was still quite a ways to go from my stop, so at that moment, I just decided to let it be for now, I guess. I've seen people like him before, and usually they just mutter incoherent babble to themselves, and generally not bother anyone else, but this guy was unique. At that moment, my music was still playing and I wasn't looking at him, but then he moved and sat right in front of me, his grin exposing his rotten teeth, and his gaze bewildered. He stared at me, and this was right after a stop. Again, I tried to ignore him further, but it was impossible, considering he was sitting right in front of me like that. I then noticed he began to say something. I couldn't hear what he was saying, and I really didn't want to, but he kept saying it and saying it and saying it, and started to look agitated. So, eventually, I took out my earbuds. "Did you do it?" he said with a raspy voice. I had no clue what he was talking about, so I just remained silent, the ride feeling like forever now. "Did you do it?" he started to shout. Then he stood up looking very angry. Now, if this was a normal person, I would have told him to fuck off by now, but this guy was on something. It was probably meth. And if there's anything you should know about meth users is that fighting them or pissing them off too much is a grave, grave mistake. They can't feel shit. Well, anyways, eventually the train finally stopped. I got off quickly, still about 8 stops away from my destination, and he simply stared at me as the train rode away with his haunting and bewildered gaze. Still, no clue what he was on about asking me if I did it? If I did it. But, to be honest, I'd rather not know.